Right.
I thought it was a bit insubstantial. I would have liked more technical detail, but it was interesting.
There are other videos with more detail on. Also, I didn't agree with all his statements and assumptions. But, let's have your comments and questions first. I'd like to go. Chris, general comments?
Well, I can mention something about the structure of the octopus. You can turn its head inside out. It's like a pouch.
Wow.
So you can sort of squish
alive
it.
or dead?
Well, even if it's alive, you can do that. It's not very kind, but it is possible.
Okay.
So its eyes are inside facing each other, and it's got, you know, all its internal organs then sort of sticking out. It's quite weird.
All right.
Derek?
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. It's very interesting. I think this has been looked at very much in isolation, and I think we could only really draw conclusions once octopi have been compared with other cephalopods, etc. I mean, are there, do other things also have similar or some of the similar characteristics of independently functioning limbs, etc., etc.? How different are they from their genetic relatives, if you like, to, in that sense, are they really standout different, or are they merely the sort of well-achieved top achievers in their group?
Yeah, of course, when you watch a YouTube video, then you get a whole lot of other videos suggested, and I didn't have time to look at them, but there were a couple of other octopus videos which were much longer, twice as long and so on as this one, and seem to have a lot of the same detail in just looking at the initial couple of seconds. But so this one seems to be a bit of a condensation of other videos. So yeah, I think there are a lot of other videos there with a lot more detail in, if that's of interest. I've got a couple of points which piqued my curiosity. The one was where they mentioned the number of genes which code for proteins being 30,000. Then I began to wonder, okay, how does that compare with humans? And does it have any significance for evolution? So I started going into that a bit. And what I actually found was very interesting. It seems to have no relation or significance to or measure of evolution per se, as to how many genes or how many chromosomes you've got and so on. There are some organisms with only 1 or 2 chromosomes, and there are others with thousands. A lot of plants have multiple things, and there are various reasons why, chromosomes and genes can increase and decrease during evolution. So it can go either way.
Yeah, there's no correlation.
I've got a short video here that I've got a link to. It's only about 3 minutes. It goes into it, but if you want to watch it, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, no, there's no correlation between the number of genes and levels of development.
Yeah. So I've got some interesting links on just listed in a notepad little file if anybody's interested in that to look at.
Yeah, this is why I think you would need to have comparative information about other animals. I mean, it's a bit like saying, finding a giraffe on its own and not realize and assuming this is an amazing thing adapted to this life, and then not being aware that there are hundreds of other animals with variations which are equally adapted and high functioning. So I think you need to look at the octopus and compare it with other similar animals or animals within the cephalopods, and to see to what extent are they really different.
Yeah, good question. Would you like to research that for us and give us an answer?
No, I'm just saying, you asked about the comments. Yeah, you can't just look at one animal that's part of a huge, large group in isolation, because they're in a group because they have certain common characteristics. But you can get huge variation within that. I mean, we know that with mammals.
They made the claim that they're so different to everything else on the planet. So I just like to
Yeah, I think you'd need more information and proof, if you like, that its closest relatives have X, Y, and Z, don't have A, B, and C, or whatever. But it's we've got no comparative information in this to make that judgment.
Yeah. Okay, the other point I made, which, well, most, if not all scientists seem to make, is that he made the point that they live alone. And when they're born, they have to learn everything all over again. And I totally do not agree with that. And I think the evidence is rather obvious. I mean, you look at a lot of animals, humans even, if you look at instinctive behavior. Now, when I was a child, I picked up a baby bird in a small oak forest on the farm I was born on. It had no feathers yet. It was obviously just a few days old, and I took it home and I raised it with my pet budgies in the cage. And when it became an adult, about a year later, it actually turned out to be a type of finch. It was a yellow finch, and it turned out to be a male. And the male finches build nests when they get to sort of breeding age. And this one, when it got to breeding age, when it was allowed sort of during the day, it was allowed to fly around the house. We had these fly screen windows to prevent flies from coming in because we lived on a dairy farm. So they couldn't get out anywhere, even if the windows were open. And it would go and find bits of thread and bits of wool and stuff all around the house and bring them back to the cage and start weaving a nest. Now, how does an animal which has never been in contact with any of its species automatically know how to weave a nest? It has to have been inherited. So instinctive behavior to me is like inherited memory.
Yeah, I agree.
And, what is the unit of inheritance? It's the gene.
The other thing is, just because you have 8 brains.
So the fascinating thing to me is, how does memory get recorded in a gene? Why is nobody researching that?
They probably are.
And I believe that animals like octopuses actually inherit a lot of the things they need to know to survive and carry on and behave. And so
yeah, although they wouldn't survive otherwise, they wouldn't be here.
And all creatures, in fact.
Yeah, and the thing is, just because you have 8 brains or 9 brains doesn't mean to say you are better off or more advanced than if something else only has 1 brain.
Yeah, but
the numbers don't necessarily mean that you're better off. More brains means you're more intelligent.
Yeah, but if you look at all the behaviors that has anybody here seen that movie made by the South African guy from Cape Town, actually? The my Octopus, my teacher, something like that. I think it actually won some sort of an Oscar. Has anybody seen that movie?
Absolutely, yeah. That's Foster, Craig Foster.
Yeah.
And his brother, yeah. And there's some kind of pictures of that too, where it just goes into far greater depths of what they had studied about octopuses. I mean, the actual movie itself is very, I mean, what it was teaching him to be Octopus, my teacher, was much more about relationship and the way they actually grew a kind of relationship. So it was a social sort of teaching that was covered. But they'd done an immense amount of other research with his son, who still does the diving in that area and so on. Yeah. So yeah, it was fantastic. But so is this. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, he's the nephew of a guy that was at school with me, and I think he went to the same school.
He did, yeah. My brother taught him. They also got another award for the Bushman. It was something called the something hunter. And even they were I think they were still at school when they put this thing together. And they had photography where they had cameras on the animal. So they showed how Bushman got into the mind of the animal. So and it's, when you saw those interviews on Craig, he was very much like, he just suddenly, after getting that award, he just did nothing for a few years. He was almost depressed, and then suddenly, as this octopus thing started to grow on him, it took on that relationship, kind of made him get to this next level of producing that. But yeah, no, you're right. It's him and his brother were both, they by mistake went on a tour that my brother was doing 4 bishops in the house, and Porter Motors, they ran out of a bus that couldn't go, and Porter Motors lent it, but they providing, I think, that that those brothers came. And Hugh said they weren't amazing on that tour, but when he actually did a coffee table book on that hunting on the Bushman, he actually wrote in that to my brother that it was from that tour that he developed his interest in nature and its connections and so on. So teachers get their rewards as well.
Yeah, I think we underestimate a lot of stuff in animal world. Part of the thing is thinking that we're so great and everything else doesn't come near us. I think it can cloud our thinking too much sometimes, and we don't appreciate what there really is out there all the time.
Yeah, I agree with that. There is an arrogance in the way that we tend to look at life.
I think, yeah, I don't know. I'd like to go into this thing a bit of how different octopuses and cephalopods are from other animals and so on. You know, it's very interesting. I never knew this thing about their blood having totally not the same kind of hemoglobin as we do. It's like a copper-based thing, not iron. So they've got blue blood. Makes them royal, doesn't it?
Yeah, but what other animals have the same type of blood, and does it matter?
Yeah,
how does it matter?
These are all very good questions. I think they're worth following up. And
remember, the other thing is that our ancestors came from the oceans, and they moved onto land. So, you know, we all came from the ocean, and some moved off and did other things, and others didn't. I mean, it may just be, you know, just pure happenstance. There may not be a purpose behind it. It could just be that they did, and they had the characteristics that enabled them to survive.
Would anybody like to look at this 3-minute video of the genetic difference between organisms? It's very interesting.
Sorry, just before you get there, is there any other? It was interesting just hearing that connection to space, or the possibility. You know, I wondered what this had to do with astronomy, but now I understand that we might have come.
I remember that as a study group, we just look at anything that's very interesting. And often, actually, things do have a connection with astronomy. It's amazing. All right. Let me quickly find that one then. Okay, I'm going to share this. Here's my Zoom. Share screen. Okay, I'm going to play this.
Domestic cats have 38, dogs have 78, earthworms have 36, goldfish have 104, and we have 46, the same number as the sable antelope, but 2 fewer than potatoes. I'm talking about chromosomes. You might think the more chromosomes an organism has, the more complex it is, because chromosomes contain genes, and more genes means more fancy, right? Not right. Unless you can convince me that potatoes and goldfish are more complex than we are, though certain members of Congress kind of feeling that way right now. But the question is, why do different organisms have different and seemingly unrelated numbers of chromosomes? Like, how did a species of ant end up with only 2 chromosomes while a species of fern has more than 1,200? And why do we have 46 while chimps, our closest genetic relatives, have 48? The short answer is mistakes happen, and in this case to DNA. And different kinds of organisms have responded to those mistakes in different ways. Chromosomes are basically spools of DNA. Each chromosome consists of proteins called histones with a single very long molecule of DNA wrapped around each one. Without the organizing structure of chromosomes, DNA would be way too unruly to replicate or even fit inside a cell. It'd be like a tangle of extension cords in your junk drawer, just a hot mess. But while chromosomes do a good job of keeping DNA safe in the rough and tumble life of a cell, DNA does sometimes get damaged. This damage often leaves little strands of DNA dangling from their chromosomes. When this happens, special repair proteins in the cell recognize the damage and industriously reconnect those strands. But sometimes they connect the wrong ones together and 2 chromosomes become fused. This is simply known as random fusion. This decreases the total number of chromosomes in the cell, but it doesn't necessarily mean that any genetic information is lost. It's just spooled up in fewer packages. For example, the chromosomes of humans and chimps are nearly the same except for human chromosome number 2, which looks remarkably like 2 chimp chromosomes that got stuck together. So that explains how over time organisms could end up with fewer chromosomes. But how come other living things wind up with so incredibly many? Scientists think that this is because of another kind of mistake which can happen during the type of cell division that makes sex cells called meiosis. Typically during meiosis, each chromosome in the parent cell is copied in the original and its copy are pulled apart into separate sperm or egg cells. But sometimes, just because, I guess, the chromosomes and their copies don't pull apart and end up both getting drawn into the sex cell. Again, this doesn't mean that any additional genetic information is there, just an extra set of copies. Now you take a couple of these sperm or eggs with extra chromosomes and make a baby with them, because usually they're still viable, and then pow, got an offspring with more chromosomes than its parents had. Some organisms, like plants that can self-fertilize, wind up with extra chromosomes because of this. Others have had this happen a lot because they've just been around for a really long time. That's probably the case with adder's tongue, an ancient fern-like plant that boasts more chromosomes than any other plant, 1,260. Scientists think this chromosome sticking might have happened to it at least 10 times in its multi-million-year history. And it's probably happened to lots of other organisms too, but over time, many of them have lost those extra chromosomes, while others, like the adder's tongue, have just hung on to them. So, does more chromosomes mean fancier? No. But weirder and fascinating? Definitely. Thank you for watching this episode of SciShow. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and down in the comments below. And if you want to keep getting
Okay, I thought that was a useful bit of info.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, as I say, I've got some links if anybody to information. There's one with a very nice chart on which organisms have got the least chromosomes and goes on to list a whole lot of examples of increasing chromosomes in various organisms. And it's quite fascinating how diverse and how it jumps around. My original thought was, you know, if there are so many other things with a lot more chromosomes than humans, are humans actually, is that because humans are less evolved than they are? And I suppose in a sense it is. It is a function of time, but it doesn't mean, you know, that that fern, for example, is more intelligent or in any way than a human being, just or better at survival or better at anything. It's just coincidence.
Yeah. The other thing on the other side of looking at this, Derek, is the fact that, for instance, bananas have about 30% of the same chromosomes and genes as we have.
Yeah.
So,
chimpanzees,
you know, there's a lot of ways you can look at this.
Chimpanzees have got 99.6% of the same genes that we have, but that 0.4 is apparently, or 0.4 is a DNA. That is something like millions of protein encoding whatever.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. You can't
it makes a huge difference. That tiny percentage makes a huge difference between.
Yeah, this is why it's not a linear thing. You know, the more you have, the more advanced you are. If you can look at these numbers in various ways, and it just shows, you know, if we share a substantial minority of our genes with bananas, there's a message.
Yeah, it's what's more important is what the genes encode for and what they do. It's not how many you have, it's actually what they do.
Yeah, and again, some do nothing, and they don't understand it. We've got a lot of junk DNA, which apparently doesn't do anything, but it's there, and it possibly does have a role. We just don't understand it. So
okay.
it's very complex.
Sorry, Jenny?
As I say, it's very complex because on paper we've got all this DNA, but a lot of it is actually so-called junk DNA. They don't know what it does or if it has any function at all.
Don't get me started on junk DNA. I had a big argument with one of my sons.
Like a lot of debate about it because
university and
yeah, there's all sorts of debate about it because there's so much of it. You're thinking, well, why is it still there? Is it doing anything? If we didn't have it, would it make a difference? If we do have it, what does it do? So this is an incredibly complex topic in terms of trying to understand it and look at the variety of life and the history of life.
Yeah, my son made the statement when we were driving somewhere for a weekend as a family together, and he was started talking about the plants that were growing in the field next door, and that my two sons had a bit of an argument, and he started saying he made a comment about junk DNA, and he was at that stage, second year or something, university. So I asked him, look, who told you that the DNA is junk? So he said, no, his lecturer told him. So I had a huge argument with him and said, don't believe everything your lecturers say. Always question everything. Absolutely. And 2 weeks later, I sent him an email with new research which showed that there was a purpose for junk DNA.
Yeah, but they're not sure what the purpose is.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was about.
Yeah. Well, that's
just an example.
Elaine and David have had their hand up for a while, and so has Peter Harvey.
Yeah, sorry, can we just give them a chance? I think Peter was first. Peter, go ahead.
Okay. It's Barbara, actually. She's got a couple of questions here, please.
Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, I was just wondering about the copper in the blood. So if there's a correlation between I don't know if they're cold-blooded or warm-blooded creatures, but if there's copper in the blood, could there be anything related to energetic or heat stimulated senses?
Well, I mean, fish and other cold-blooded, so-called cold-blooded animals also have blood. Just, I think it is a cold-blooded creature. I'm not sure, but I think so. And the copper is just a different. It's doing the same purpose as the iron in our hemoglobin, except they've just got a different molecule, which is copper-based and not iron-based. It does the same thing. It attracts oxygen and transports it around the blood. It just doesn't do it quite as efficiently as iron, but it's just interesting that they have a totally different molecule doing that function. And not as efficiently as hemoglobin does.
And do other sea creatures also have copper in their blood?
I've no idea. It's the first time I've heard of this. I'd have to research it.
Very good. That's the comparisons which are important.
Yeah, very interesting thing to follow up. Yeah.
Okay.
So as soon as we found out, I'll let you know. It's all new information to me as well. Okay.
Jenny, you were going to say something?
So go ahead. Sorry, was that David or who wanted to say something?
I think Jenny wanted to say something a moment. It might have been in reply to Barbara's question. I don't know.
And I'm just saying this is why we need to know more about what's happening with other animals. We'll be able to compare things. Elaine was also wanting to say something.
Yeah, Elaine, I think your mic is off.
Yeah, I was just intrigued. I never knew how many chromosomes plants had, but talking about instinctive behavior, when you think the chemical mechanics of plants, what they manage to produce, starches and nicotine and caffeine and chocolate, the chemical gymnastics that happens in a plant is quite phenomenal. So I was just thinking, no wonder they have so many chromosomes.
Yeah, it does make human beings realize that there are other things out there that are a lot more complex than we are. Even though they're quite different. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Fred Hoyle, many years ago, made a statement that of the 212 proteins that go to make a living cell, forming by chance is 10 to 212, which is a phenomenal number, against. So, when you're looking at it, there is a possibility that assistance has come from outside we understand on Earth, i.e. a meteor or something like that.
Yeah, it's this whole thing of what's out there in space. I mean, I remember Steve Klein always had a theory that the oil on Earth, it's got nothing to do with decomposed plants or anything like that, the standard sort of theory we were taught at school and so on. He says it all was there, always in space. And then we learn about these enormous clouds of organic
Yes.
materials out in space. Quite easily, that stuff had been incorporated into a planet when it formed and compressed deep down. It can easily form oil. So, I mean, you know, I think we assume too much that we know more or less what's going on when there's actually an enormous amount to learn.
Yeah.
There's a sort of infinite recursion going on, because if you say we can only have this because it derives from that, then the question is, well, what does that derive from? And sort of so infinitum.
Yeah.
You know, there can be chance coming together of chemicals that react in strange ways, and some of them seem to have found ways of persisting and replicating.
And we're living in very, very interesting times with things like James Webb finding new things virtually every week, sometimes every day. Yeah. Interesting times.
Yeah.
All right.
On the subject of, you know, having DNA that is less complex, and yet the organism seems to be more highly evolved. Well, you know, we did see in that other video that the chromosomes can pare down. And just because some baggage is there doesn't necessarily detract from its main function. It may support it. We're not sure on many levels. You know, we have specific knowledge about certain areas, but we are quite ignorant about the totality.
Absolutely.
But if things can be pared down, you know, then it's like a distillation. You know, I mean, you can have crude oil and you can distill it to some spirit that is highly volatile and has different properties and different uses. So I'm sure the same applies to genetics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, I thought the octopus was very interesting, and I learned a lot about octopuses, and I will look at them differently from now on. And I will never eat calamari. I wasn't a great fan of calamari anyway.
I love calamari, but you're right, Derek. I would just like to say that it seems to me that actually octopi are more intelligent than humans from the point of view of they haven't messed up their environment. You know, knowingly, and humans have actually messed up their environment totally knowingly. Okay, that comes from a greenie.
No, you're right. Interesting point.
There's no argument with that point, Peter.
Yeah.
How many chromosomes does an AI computer have?
Good one.
In fact, that
AI computer is just another version of a pen, just a tool.
in that, it just struck me that in that octopus, my teacher as well, it did actually jump out of the water at one stage onto a rock when a shark was chasing it. So it had actually developed the ability. I don't know how amphibious it was, how quickly it had to get back in the water, but it certainly was able to get out the water and sit there for a long time looking like a rock.
I found one in a pool, in a rock pool down here in Full Cliff Beach, a little octopus about the size of my fist. And I helped it out into the sea, and it seemed to accept my help.
Well, if AI is based on the digital technology of the day, then its DNA would be and, or, and not gates.
And its chromosomes?
Yeah, they're the if gates and but gates.
Ah, okay. Got it all sorted now. I think you actually got a point. I mean, how does the octopus's its 9 brains must be sort of independent, but they must still communicate with each other. So the chief brain's got to send the signal to the other brains. Okay, I want to move.
That's what
direction,
networking's all
but
about.
you work out how to do it.
Certainly in neuroplasticity now, there's 3 definite brains, you know, the head brain, the heart brain, and the gut brain, which are very separately have brain abilities that do operate quite separately in some ways. So maybe they'll find a lot more of those as well.
Ah, Mick, you'll have to explain to us about neuroplasticity sometime and give us a talk on it. I've seen that term a lot and I've never quite understood exactly what it meant. I've seen it when they talk about how kids learn and all this sort of thing.
I must just say, neuroplasticity is a concept been around for many, many, many years. It's only just become fashionable.
Okay.
Like, everybody's known about it before. When I was working as a physio, we used neuroplasticity when we would to work with stroke. It's been around as a concept for decades. But it's suddenly become fashionable, and suddenly everybody's thinking this is something new, which it isn't. And all the learning theories that go back to this 18th century and onwards have used neuroplasticity. They may not have talked about it as such, but it was the way that they describe learning is all about a plastic brain, which can evolve and learn. So it's a very fashionable concept at the moment. It's nothing new.
Okay, Jenny, either you or Mick have got to give us a talk on that. Sounds interesting.
I would think that there's, you know, certainly since brain mapping and that has taken place too, there's immense advances in information. I guess it's like space, you know, instead of just thinking we are planets around a sun, you know, as these satellites and more information comes back, so your science keeps growing the unknowns. But yeah, the brain runs the body. But there's a few of them. It is. I could probably put some notes together if you want me to at some stage.
Yeah, please. David and Elaine, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, Derek, I've just been thinking, you know, so much of behavior is instinctive, whether it be animal or human. And one just wonders to what extent the octopus, how much of that is instinctive. I mean, I've seen birds do really strange things, and it's all quite instinctive. So how much is instinctive behavior in both animals and human, and how much is a conscious decision?
To me, when you say when you ask the question, how much is instinctive behavior, the way I interpret that is how much is inherited memory behavior, inherited from their predecessors in their genes. And to me, that is a really fascinating subject.
Yeah, that's what I would call instinctive behavior. I remember once we had, I think it was some mosses, and they made a nest, and they were tiny, and these Diedrich's cuckoo came along and planted, you know, laid an egg there. And these 2 little birds fed that Diedrich's cuckoo, and it grew and grew and grew and grew. I mean, it might have been instinct, but it was the most silly, you know, it went against all logic. So even though it might have been instinctive for them to feed the babe, you know, the Diedrich's cuckoo went and laid its egg there. You know, it just doesn't make sense. I think an intellect, clear-minded intellect wouldn't do that. So that must be instinctive behavior.
And I believe animals and groups of animals learn from the interaction with the rest, the environment around them, and change their behavior accordingly. And that gets transmitted to their young quite often. What were you going to say, Mick?
No, I think that's right. I think, you know, a lot of what was, and I'm just going back to sort of the behaviorist versus psychoanalyst kind of views, but certainly, like if you go back to your bird's egg, I know the one Japanese chap showed that although it looked as if a chicken would come out of an egg, know how to pick his way out, get out there and actually start picking food straight away, had to be instinctive. because that was a feeding instinct. And likewise with maternal instinct, that, you know, they have this tendency to be able to look after young. But when you take away certain, I think he put some Vaseline in an egg and he watched this egg grow, and at a certain stage it takes its heart beats and it actually then starts that head moving movement. And then at another stage, some mucus or something is there and it gulps and it has to swallow that. So by the time it pops out of the egg, it's actually already developed that motion to make it. So it was learned, if you like, prenatally. And likewise with the instinct to be maternal, they kind of found, well, it had to be, until they actually put, even when they put a total isolation of a mother, it still had this instinct to lick another, you know, its baby clean, let's say. On I don't know whether these are monkeys or whatever. But as soon as you put like a bib on that neck, and it couldn't lick itself to keep itself clean, it would eat its young. So, you know, there's a lot of what would seem instinctive in maternal instinct, which is in fact learned by self-care, let's say, to also pass that on to maternal care. But yeah, it's a whole different subject, the nature-nurture issue.
Okay, but how come my budgies don't want to weave a nest and the finch did? You're not gonna get that one out of my memory. Sorry.
Well,
you're not going to explain that one away so easily. Okay, where we now? What's the time? Is everybody all right with a starting time of 6, by the way? There were a couple of people that came in at sort of 5 past and 10 past and so on. Were they in traffic jams and would they prefer a different time, or are we okay with it starting time at 6? Any
generally manage 6.
I've no problem. No problem.
It's
All right.
just remembering the change in time.
Willie Koorts, I see you joined us.
Hi, thank you. Yes, yeah, I couldn't resist the advert and yeah, so I just had to join, and it's yeah, been enjoying it here. Thank you.
Right. Have you had any experience with octopuses besides eating?
Only yeah, eating and my octopus teacher. That's about my extent. Yeah, so that made me curious and of course enjoying this. Yes.
Okay. Well, I learned a lot from this video. A hell of a lot.
Definitely.
Hope everybody else did as well, and I hope you enjoyed it. If we got no other questions or comments, then
I think it's been extremely informative and a most interesting discussion afterwards as well. I think it's about the longest discussion period we've had that I can remember. And I just, I'm very grateful to all the participants for making this a really enjoyable and informative meeting. I think it's been excellent.
Thanks, Peter, for arranging this topic and for keeping us on track with our study group meetings and running it, essentially. All I'm doing is just hosting it on Zoom, actually. All right. Thanks, everybody, for your attendance. If there's no, we will wind it up. And if anybody's interested in the recording, I will upload it, of the discussion. I will upload it to YouTube. Just pop Peter a question if you want the link on an email.
I'll certainly forward it to everybody on the list today.
Yeah.
And a couple of people who've apologized. So if anybody does not want it, you can let me know, or just scrub it when you get it.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Peter, I will send you I've done a screen capture of the attendees. I don't know if you want
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, I'll send you that. Okay.
Cheers, all.
All right. Cheers, all, and good evening.
Cheers.
Yes.
Thank you.
Me.
That was thought-provoking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good night.
Thanks, Terry. Good night.
Thank you.